Y vamos a comenzar ya con nuestra conferencia magistral. Como ven, ya estamos cambiando aquí en el escenario porque nos estamos acercando al final. Pero no podían irse a casa a repasar todo lo aprendido sin tener justamente esta plática tan relevante sobre este debate mundial sobre el clima. La conferencia se titula La alimentación como punto central del debate mundial sobre el clima. Está a cargo justamente por Julia Collins y Beatriz Jacoste. Ellas forman este Fireside Chat para exponer este tema a plenitud. Pero ¿qué les parece que aunque ya tuvimos aquí en el escenario a Beatriz, conozcamos un poco acerca de la trayectoria de ambas? Así que vamos a conocerla.
Julia Collins fue cofundadora de Sume Pizza, donde se convirtió en la primera mujer negra en crear una empresa tecnológica valorada en más de $1,000 millones. Se dedicó a crear empresas de alimentación líderes en el sector en la ciudad de Nueva York. Actualmente es fundador y CEO de Planet FWD, la principal plataforma de descarbonización para la industria de consumo. Beatriz Jacoste, graduada en Relaciones Internacionales por la Universidad Europea de Madrid y máster en Innovación Alimentaria, Food Innovation Program, por la Universidad de Módena y Reggio Emilia. Finalicemos este primer día del Summit con Julia y Beatriz.
Go now, okay. Well, good afternoon. I'm back, but now in English. Thank you for staying until this late. I think Julia, she will be speaking before me, right? So I think I made a mistake, but right? It's your go.
I'm going to go, but
Yeah,
I love you. I love having a wing woman. Well, good evening, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here with you in Mexico City. It's really quite an honor to be a part of Foodtech Summit and Expo 2024, and I feel particularly honored to be here in collaboration with KM0 and my dear friend Beatriz. What I'm going to talk to you about today is something that is so deeply a passion of mine, but I also want to understand how this might be affecting some of you. So if you would do me the favor, could you please raise your hand if you or anyone in your life has been affected by one of the following: rising food prices, extreme weather events, maybe a flood, a wildfire, asthma, or maybe it's something a bit more personal. Maybe you have family that are struggling with anxiety about the future of our planet, some fear, some sadness. So what I want to talk to you about today is the fact that we are all in this together, and that as leaders and movers and shakers in the food system, we actually have a really unique role to play. So I want to take you back in time to the year 2021. In 2021, I was sitting at my desk minding my own business when all of a sudden my mom sent me this title: How One Woman with a Box of Crackers Aims to Save the Planet. I was that woman. Well, gosh, Forbes, no pressure. In all seriousness, I was very proud to see my work in food and climate described this way, and my mom sure was proud. But there were lots of people who looked a little bit like some of you in the audience, like, what? She's going to save the planet with a box of crackers? And I understand that skepticism, because most of the time when we talk about addressing climate change, we think about electric vehicles or solar panels or windmills, and all of those technologies are incredibly important. But the fact of the matter is, one of the biggest levers that we have is sitting right there in our kitchens. About 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions come from land use and food systems. 1/3. And so the future of our world really does depend on improving the way that we farm, manufacture, distribute, retail, consume, and even dispose of everything that we eat. And so the reason why I'm here today is to just call out and say, decarbonizing our global food supply chains really has got to be at the heart of our global climate strategy. And everybody in this room has a role to play. Because in building Moonshot, that wasn't the end of my story. It was actually just the beginning. A few years after this headline, I actually decided to sell my company to Patagonia because I wanted to tell a bigger story. I wanted to have a bigger impact. And this is an example of how collaboration can really be the catalyst for great change. Because as cool as it is to get a headline like this, do you know what's even cooler? To have a headline that says, global food industry collaborates to save the planet. That's the kind of headline that I hope that we're driving toward. And let me tell you another truth. We actually have all the ingredients that we need to get the job done. And I'll be even a little bit controversial, especially as a girl from Silicon Valley, sort of the land of new technology. When it comes to the relationship between food and climate change, we don't even need any new technology. We actually have all the ingredients here. And so why isn't the job getting done? Why am I standing up here? Why are we still trying to solve this problem? Because in any chemical reaction, you need a catalyst. There's something missing from that ingredient soup. And the catalyst that we need is collaboration. When Patagonia and I sat down to talk about doing a deal together, it wasn't just about the dollars and cents. Of course, the economics had to work. It was about working together collaboratively to tell a bigger story, to convert more acres of agriculture to organic and regenerative practices, to get more consumers excited about sustainable products, to get more retailers to carry those brands. It was about working together because together we're stronger than we are alone. And Patagonia really is an example of this collaborative spirit. Beginning with the Moonshot acquisition, they decided to go on a real quest. Now they're working with beer companies like Deschutes and Dogfish Head to bring Kernza into the beer system. About 99% of the beer industry is not using organic or regenerative ingredients. But now there's an opportunity to convert this $186 billion industry into one that really can have a role to play in terms of climate crisis. And you might expect that Patagonia would do something like this, right? They're often viewed as the most sustainable company on the planet. But what about some of our friends who are more traditional? What about companies like ADM working with PepsiCo to convert 2 million acres of agriculture to regenerative in the next, between now and 2030? Or maybe it's our friends at Smucker's who are converting their peanut butter supply chains so that 5 million acres will be converted by 2025. These are monumental shifts that are happening in our industry, but when you hear me talking about these stories, it's never just one company doing it alone. It's never one entrepreneur or one technology or one country. It is always about banding together. What I will also say is this is really good business. Saving the planet is actually really good business. The regenerative and organic movement alone is a totally new industry that's projected to reach $17 billion by 2027. There are real dollars here. And guess what? Consumers care. Bain found in a 2024 study this year that 60% of consumers are more concerned about climate change now than they were even 2 years ago. That's a huge shift. And brands that can credibly message their sustainability, and I'm not talking about greenwashing, I'm talking about credible messaging, scientifically backed, done the right way, those brands are going 20% faster than traditional brands. And anybody in this room who owns a brand knows how hard it is to achieve that kind of growth. Sustainability is one of the ways that you get there. And so what does it mean for everyone in this room? Well, it means we are uniquely positioned to actually tackle this problem. And we are uniquely positioned to reach to our right and reach to our left and figure out a way to work together. Collaboration is the catalyst that we need to really transform our food systems so that they work better for all people and for our home planet. Collaboration is the catalyst. Okay, and what gives me the authority to say all this? You know, besides the fact that I'm friends with Beatriz, why am I the one up here telling you this? Well, I've spent the last 2 decades of my career working at the intersection of food and technology. I've done everything from patent compostable packaging to build factories using robots to make pizza and everything in between. But I knew that I had to do so much more after a life-changing event, and that was the birth of my first son. And I think there's so many people in this audience that know what it's like to become a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle for the first time. You know, you hold that baby in your arms and you're filled with so much joy, and you start to see the world not through your own eyes but through theirs. And you ask yourself, how can I protect this tiny human being? What do they need? And I'll tell you something, when I held my son in my arms, the first thing I thought was what it's going to be like to raise this child with rising temperatures and sea levels, biodiversity loss, increasingly cataclysmic and catastrophic storms. It was too much for me to stomach. And so I decided to build on my success with Moonshot and launch a platform called Planet Forward. And I went all in. I gave it everything that I have. And so I'm now leading Planet Forward and working with iconic companies like ADM and General Mills to help them understand their emissions, to help them comply with regulation, to help them go from setting a net zero goal to actually achieving that goal. And again, it really is all about collaboration. Even smaller brands are getting into the action. Planet Forward worked with a company called Numi Tea so that they were the first in their industry to put carbon labels on their boxes. And I remember the first time walking down the grocery aisle, I think I was at Whole Foods. I picked up a box of that Numi tea and I kind of traced my finger around that label, and I felt so much hope because it was so much more than about putting a number in a circle and slapping it on a box. It was about creating a meaningful moment for everyday consumers to engage with their values right there in the grocery store. There's so much exciting work happening. There truly is. But there's so much more that frankly needs to be done. And I think we're getting there. You know, one thing that I will say, I just got a little bit lost here, sorry, is that we're living in a pretty narrow window of time. So as excited as I am about the collaboration that I'm seeing, there's so much more that needs to happen. Let me put a really fine point on it. We have fewer than 5 years to reduce global emissions by 40%. Okay, that's a big job. And we are not on track right now, but we can be. We can be if we reach across the aisle, work with our closest competitors, and really work collaboratively. So when I look at this audience, I see so many people. I see people who are bringing healthy food to kids in the inner city in the South Bronx. I see people who are supplying ingredients to the natural and organic industry globally. I see distributors. I see brands. I see media platforms. I see so many people that are uniquely positioned to fight this fight. And what I want us to do is fight it together, because no single company or organization or solution or ingredient or country can do it on our own. We can only do it if we're working together. Thank you. So here's my call to action. I'm up here talking the talk, but let's also walk the walk. If you need support in understanding your environmental impacts, Planet Forward can help you. And if not Planet Forward, we have many other peers in this industry that are here to help you get that first step, or the second or the third. Sometimes you have to walk, then crawl, then run. I will also say, take inspiration from collaborations that are already happening. Right now, PepsiCo and Coca-Cola are working together on a reusable cup program in a town near me in Petaluma, California. Guess who else is working together? Starbucks and Peet's. If we can get Coca-Cola and PepsiCo and Starbucks and Peet's to work together, what can't we do? That's the kind of collaboration that we really need. Together, we can build a future that is not only delicious and nutritious, but one that really allows us to live on this beautiful planet. We're standing at a pivotal moment in history. We're living in a narrow window of time when it is still possible to stave off the worst effects of climate change. And that might feel heavy, but it's actually a privilege. It's a privilege to be alive. It's a privilege to be in this room. It's a privilege to be a leader during a time when we still have a chance to get the job done. So let's not waste this shot. Let's fix food, and in doing so, let's create a future that we all want to live in. Thank you so much for letting me be with you tonight.
Muy bien. ¿Nos pueden ayudar a retirar esto, por favor? Gracias. Okay, so I was so eager to speak to you. That's why I jumped in. I couldn't wait. We have been trying to do this for so long, and you irradiate such a beautiful energy. Thank you so much for being here. I admire you. I think you are one of the main food change makers. You are a gold standard, the real life example of what can be done in this work. So thank you really much. I can't believe my luck to be here speaking to you. I'm going to go ahead and read your bio because it's very impressive. You touched upon some of your achievements, but I'm going to do this again. So you are the founder and CEO of Planet Forward. Later we will be speaking about this company, a pioneering company dedicated to addressing climate change by facilitating the creation of climate-friendly products. You have extensive background in the food industry, including leadership roles at Union Square Hospitality Group and co-founding Zoom Pizza. You mentioned the robots making the pizza. I remember watching the news and seeing this very crazy, exciting company in the Foodtech space, one of the pioneering Foodtech companies. And when you were co-founding Zoom Pizza, you became the first Black woman to lead a billion-dollar tech company. Wow. Your passion for sustainability and innovation made you create Moonshot Snacks, the box of crackers we saw in the back, the first climate-friendly snack brand. And as you said, Patagonia acquired this brand. I will ask you some questions on this because Patagonia is one of my other best practices examples, companies I look up to. So I think that was such a perfect pairing. And you are an advocate for diversity, serving in multiple boards and supporting female entrepreneurs. So you have done so much for the world, for yourself. But for me, as I say, you are this real life example of what future leaders should look like. You are a different type of leader. So my first question goes related to your leadership style, which I have really admired, being so kind, irradiating that happiness, that peace that you exert. You have achieved so much. So how have you done this in this world that is very hard, very tough, and with many leaders and decision makers that look very different to us?
You know, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that doesn't feel a little different for some reason. You know, a little different because of how you look or what you believe or your interests or where you come from. I think we all feel a little different sometimes. But I have to tell you, earlier in my career, every boss I ever had gave me the same feedback, which was, Julia, you're just too nice. You're too nice so no one will take you seriously. You're too nice so you won't know how to negotiate. You're too nice so people will be nervous working with you. You're too nice, you're too nice, you're too nice. And of all the feedback that I got in my career that I did listen to, I just never listened to that feedback because for me, I just saw a world where people who lead with kindness actually had an advantage. I think today's young people in particular want to go to work for bosses that they actually admire. I think they want to see visions of leadership where the boss goes home at night to their family or to their friends or to their community. I think the world is actually calling for a different tone, a different timbre, a different style. And there's always room for a diversity of voices, but I have to tell you that once I kind of figured out that I could be the leader that I wanted to be and also be myself, the success that I experienced in my career really accelerated.
I can't agree more with your words. You mentioned a pivotal moment in your life when you moved not only from tech in general, you decided to focus in food and sustainability. So I wanted to delve into that. Why was that? What was that moment like? And why did you think that sustainability and food were the solution to what you were thinking in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, I come from a family of scientists and business people. And my whole life, I had like a little something inside that made me love food. I'm the kind of person that will like go to the grocery store just to watch people shop or read a cookbook at the beach on vacation. Like, I just love food. It ignites me. But in my family, that's not what you did. And I think sometimes when you come from a background where people had to work so hard just to make it, if you're an immigrant to a country or a black person in America, you came from ancestors who had to fight so hard. And so they don't necessarily want you to take a risk. They want you to do the safe thing. So off I went to Harvard to study biomedical engineering, and off I went to Stanford to study business. But deep inside me, I never let go of that passion that I had. And I think I just got to a point in my own maturity and my own confidence and my own sense of self where I realized I can either live the rest of my life according to someone else's rules, or I can participate in solving what I think is the greatest challenge facing humanity and return to this passion that I have around food, but do it with a lot of purpose. I will say that I think the purpose gave me some permission. Do you see? I didn't just go into any old sort of food business. I went into one first with Moonshot and then with Patagonia that I thought had the opportunity to really have an impact and really serve people. And I do think for those of us like you who are so fortunate to find that thing that is purpose-driven, that is good for ourselves but also good for the world, I think that we never really have a bad day at work because you're always doing something that's meaningful.
I agree. We become unstoppable because we're so in love with what we do, and I totally agree that I believe this is the most beautiful and impactful industry and sector we could be in. So I don't picture either of us moving out of this anytime soon. So we saw the box of crackers, the famous box of crackers, and I use that example many times when I try to explain what a regenerative brand is, what a climate-friendly brand is. And I love the example because it drives a new supply chain. We can't just ask for CPG companies to launch great products. We need to incentivize farmers to make the shift into new crops. So I think that is a real, like a really complete example of how a company can drive a whole supply chain effort. And you also mentioned Patagonia Provisions acquired your company. So I'm very curious to know how that process was, how they became interested in your brand, and what you have learned with the launch of this product.
Yeah. I mean, one of the axioms that you learn in business is that companies are bought, not sold. And often the best outcomes when you look at M&A happen when there's a lot of interest on the part of the buyer, first and foremost. If you're ever in a position where you're rushing to sell your company, generally it's a bit of a distressed situation. And Moonshot was so fortunate in the sense that Patagonia, at the very top of the organization, beginning with Eve, the founder, really took an interest in what we were doing. And why? How could an organization as large and established as that even know about Moonshot? And it was because we were always very noisy. Whatever we did it big and we did it bold. When we had a collaboration, we shouted it from the rooftops. When we launched a product, we ran a big ground game around it. And so this little brand always appeared so much larger than it was, but we always did that through partners. For example, we had the chance to be on a billboard in Times Square. We were only distributed in about 1,100 doors at the time. Normally, those Times Square billboards are reserved for, the mega companies of the world. But the fact that we always worked so collaboratively with nonprofit organizations like the Climate Collaborative, with retailers like Whole Foods and Target, with suppliers like our farmers in Skagit Valley, Washington, allowed us to always tell a bigger story. And so I think that's principle number one, is look for the people who will also shout for you. You look for the Lisettes and the Stevens who showed up an hour early to my talk and were the first ones to applaud. Like, look for the other human beings that will help you to tell a bigger story. The second thing is, as much as sustainability is important for the growth of brands, the underlying business principles have to be very strong. So at Moonshot, we just had a very strong business. We had strong gross margins. We ran a very tight ship. We had very good economics. And so I think those fundamentals are also really important. Sometimes people perceive what's happening in sustainability as sort of like a fluffy, feel-good, sort of like hippies drinking tea off in the mountains thing. And all of that's fine. I like tea. I like the mountains. But what really is the foundation of a good sustainability strategy is to first have a really strong business strategy. And I think those two things in combination made it possible for Patagonia to recognize us and to approach us, and then to really make the next step, which was to talk about an acquisition.
Mm-hmm. And what was so special about the product itself? Because I'm a geek and I've read everything about these climate-friendly snacks, but what's behind these crackers?
Yeah, well, first of all, they were very tasty. They were just delicious, first and foremost.
Taste
and I
is
think,
the king,
yeah,
always.
Taste is king, queen, everything. Like, when it comes to food, deliciousness is the design imperative. When it comes to fashion, beauty is the design imperative. Nobody wants to buy things that aren't beautiful, that don't taste good. So that's number one. The reason why they were delicious, though, was because the quality of the food was heavily influenced by the fact that the farmers were practicing organic and regenerative agriculture. So when we set out to create this brand, we didn't know if we were going to make crackers or chips or gummy drops. We had no idea. I really was agnostic as to the product. And I know that sounds strange, right? Normally when you're thinking of a brand, you're like, I'm going to make cookies. I'm going to make applesauce. I'm going to make tortillas. No, we were agnostic. We went out, we did a market tour of the United States, and we ran around asking farmers, what would you want me to buy for you to convert more of your acreage to these climate-friendly farming practices? What are you already growing that you're having to sell at rock-bottom prices to the commodity system? And we found this group of farmers who were growing organic wheat and using regenerative practices like cover cropping, no-till, livestock integration, and we measured it. You could actually measure, first of all, you can see the soil. The soil is black and sticky, and it smells wonderful, healthy soil, but we could measure the improvement in soil organic carbon and nutrient density as a result of these practices. And that's why the crackers tasted so good. It wasn't just that we had a good recipe, is that we were sourcing wheat from farmers who were practicing organic and regenerative agriculture, and you could literally taste it. And that's the kind of thing that's so exciting about this next wave of products that are coming to market, is that there are opportunities to build on sustainable farming practices and then also bring the consumer in so that she doesn't have to make a trade-off between food that tastes good and food that's good for the planet. So that's what was so special about Moonshot.
Tomorrow we will be presenting a report that speaks about the 10 keys for the future of food. And they were extracted from our latest think tank. So our latest meeting of great minds, people like you, like Stephen, wanting to change the world through food. And one of the keys is, how do we have global standards, measurement, and how do we mitigate emissions, right? So of course we have to work in that space, but how do we incentivize the different actors in the supply chain? How do we incentivize retailers to care about that, producers, farmers, and even consumers? That's a very difficult change because it depends on so many agents, right?
It depends on so many agents, but I think that is what makes it a strong strategy. If there were only one party that had the power to drive change, I would be nervous. If we were only relying on consumers, or only relying on government, or only relying on investors, then that would be a bit precarious. I think the fact that it takes so many actors to drive change is both a challenge and also a benefit. So every single person in this room, every day when we shop, we have the opportunity to make a choice with what we're bringing into our families, with what we're bringing into our offices, into our schools. That's one. Anyone in the room who's a capital allocator has the choice. Who do you send the term sheet to? Do you send it to the company that has no record on sustainability? Or do you maybe influence change by asking companies to report? Anybody in this room who votes, and I hope we all do, have the chance to vote for legislators, for politicians who have a clear record on the environment. Anybody in this room who's building a brand can decide to source better, and on and on and on and on. There's nobody, when it comes to food, who has to be left out, but it's going to take all of us.
So now you are leading Planet Forward. How did you make that shift? Well, when you sold Moonshot Snacks, I guess you had to create a great technology to be able to prove that your product was regenerative, climate friendly, so you decided to use that technology, right?
That's right. When I was building Moonshot, I wanted to understand the carbon footprint of my products. I wanted to understand the biodiversity impacts of my supply chains. I had all of these questions about sustainability, but it was so hard to get answers. You know, consultants would tell me, oh, that'll cost you $50,000 or $100,000, and I thought, that doesn't make any sense. We could use technology, we could use software, we could use artificial intelligence. And this wasn't just a problem for my tiny brand. When I talked to Patagonia, when I talked to General Mills, when I talked to all of these other big food companies, they also needed better tools. And so building on the momentum that I had with Moonshot, I founded Planet Forward, and we really founded it to just do one simple thing, to make it easier for food companies, and now all consumer companies, fashion, beauty, household goods, to make it easier for these companies to understand where they are now and to have the tools that they need to improve every year.
When we speak about climate mitigation, which is, of course, another big part of our report, we see many geographical disparities in the adoption of these measurements. So, of course, some actors can be responsible and take the first step, and some countries can also take the leadership in climate action. But how do we guarantee this action is coordinated and everyone is involved, especially countries where millions of people live and countries that really influence the impact in the environment?
Yeah, it is a global conversation, right? Because the impacts of one country are felt by another. And, you know, I don't know if folks have been following a little bit about what's happening in North Carolina right now, but we have communities that were considered to be climate havens, you know, at an altitude or in an area that was shielded from climate change. They're being affected. So it is a global conversation. And I think there's some things that we can do to create a global and coordinated effort. You see some of these efforts at COP. I think we're at COP 29 this year, the Conference on Parties. But there are also some more tactical things that we can think about. How about a carbon border adjustment mechanism, so that we can measure the carbon impact of goods that are coming across our borders? How about global carbon finance for solutions providers and farmers that are doing the right thing? How about creating markets for smallholder farmers that are practicing regenerative agriculture, climate smart farming? I think there are many things that we can do, and honestly, NGOs and private sector companies can collaborate and make these things happen. I'll give you an example. The WBCSD is currently creating a framework called PACT, and it's a global framework that standardizes the way that we measure carbon across organizations. Isn't that a good idea? Isn't it a good idea to be speaking with a common language about impact across organizations? But it took the WBCSD to align everyone and get folks in the room for that to happen. So again, I'm on my soapbox tonight. It's all about collaboration as the catalyst.
So looking more at private companies taking that responsibility or that first step, because maybe sometimes we cannot rely on public institutions or governments that enforces those regulations. Because, for instance, in Europe, we are seeing very brave regulations coming up in everything that concerns climate change. But at the same time, many companies are, well, they're concerned about how that might affect their competitiveness in a global market.
That's certainly the case, and I think, the United States is and always has been maybe a decade behind Europe in terms of really standing up and creating the kind of regulation that the world needs. We also see that depending on who's in the Oval Office, this is not a political conversation, but the administration that's in power, particularly in the United States, has a huge impact on what kind of policies we need. And so I fundamentally believe in the power of the private sector to be the biggest force for change. I think government's got a role to play, but private companies have got to stand up and fight this fight. Private companies also have the most to gain and the most to lose. What would we do in a food system where we couldn't grow key crops like cocoa and coffee and nuts and on and on and on? There will literally be no global food system unless we take action. So private sector companies have the most to gain and the most to lose, and therefore we've got to get it done ourselves. We cannot always rely on government.
We spoke about those top-down solutions or actions, so how institutions and companies are taking action. But what do you think about how do we engage civil society? Because as you always say, data doesn't move the needle. People don't care about more and more data. Sometimes we think we need more information, but we have more than enough information. So I believe you do a beautiful storytelling. How do you think the new age of marketing will be?
I think it's incredibly important, and I honestly think it's got to start with kids. It's got to start with youth-led solutions to climate change. The work that friends are doing, like the Green Bronx Machine, who you're going to hear from tomorrow. Right? We have to be centering these conversations about solutions around the children who are inheriting the earth. And I don't see enough of that happening, actually. I think we see very sophisticated marketing campaigns that are rolled out similarly to how most are, but they're kind of missing that youth-led narrative. The other thing that I'll say, as it relates to sort of like a really well-run communication strategy on sustainability, it does have to start with data, and then that data gets wrapped into a story. Data alone won't change people's minds, but stories without data lead to greenwashing. And once that trust is lost with your customer, it's really hard to get back. And when one brand engages in greenwashing, it kind of diminishes the credibility of the next brand that's trying to do the right thing. So I worry about two things. I worry about what we all know as greenwashing, but I also worry about what we call green hushing. Green hushing, brands being afraid to talk about the good work that they're doing. And so I think there's something in the middle, and it's green gushing. It is brands telling data-driven stories of impact and doing so in a way that's credible. Planet Forward works with those brands to help. There are many other solutions providers that can do this, but it's so important for brands to build credible stories that their consumers can trust and to bring youth and young people into the conversation.
When we speak to many of these food change makers, what I see lacking is a consensus on where we are walking towards. So I am interested in knowing your vision of what that good food and future food system would look like, and if you also feel that lack of consensus.
That's a really good question. I'm actually curious what everyone in this room thinks. When I think about what a future looks like, I think that it is just, first of all. I think that it includes justice for all people who are participants in the food systems, starting with farmers. I think that it is regenerative, because we're at a stage in the climate crisis where it is not enough to simply stop emitting. We have to draw down. we have to address the legacy load of carbon that is already in the atmosphere. And healthy soil, managed with regenerative practices, we know that's one of the ways to get the job done. So it's got to be just, it's got to be regenerative, and I think it's got to be delicious. I think that we've got to always think about the fact that food is joy, food is love, food is pleasure, food is connection, food is all of the good things. You know, we're talking a bit serious today because we're talking about a serious thing, but let's not forget just the utter delight of eating together and sharing food. So I think that joy, that deliciousness has to be a part of the future.
Absolutely. Like the mole we had last night.
Like the
it was
mole
very
we had
delicious.
last night, yeah.
When we have these visions of the future, they tend to be strange. So they tend to be either very utopic or dystopic. So they tend to shift very much what we are seeing in our plates today, right? We don't think that in 50 years we will be eating the same as today, or at least a headline doesn't want that, right? They don't want to hear we will be eating the same old hamburger, right?
Yeah.
But maybe that's what we need. Maybe in many cases, the future food is a soup of legumes, right? So it's not such a maybe sexy or tech-driven future, right?
Well, think about this beautiful dinner that we were at last night. We went to a restaurant called Mush. This incredible chef who's traveled all around Mexico or all of Latin America.
She focused in Mexico, in different communities in Mexico.
And in each community, she went there and she spent time with the people who were making food, whether that was the grandmothers or the chefs, and she learned in detail every recipe. And in her restaurant, Mush, she brings it all together and she honors the recipes as they are. If there's a soup that doesn't use a spoon, she's not giving you a spoon. If there's a mole that's only designed to be spicy, she's not giving it to you mild. And so maybe the future of food is a return to the past. Maybe it is finding those recipes, those ingredients, those things that we know work, and centering those. Artificial intelligence will also have a role to play in how we think about recipes and creating food in the future. But most large language models are trained on the entirety of the internet. That's kind of how LLMs work, yeah? But let's think about all of the things that are not on the internet. Those recipes at Mush might not even exist anywhere online. And so even as we're thinking about the role of artificial intelligence in shaping the recipes and products of the future, I think it's really important that we take ownership over how we're training these models, so that we're bringing that grandmother wisdom, we're bringing that regenerative wisdom, we're bringing that indigenous wisdom into the conversation. Maybe the future of food is a return to the past, and maybe it is a future that's grounded in principles of love and nutrition and protecting our planet.
I would really love that. We were speaking yesterday about how we love, on the one side, coming to such events and speaking to like-minded individuals, but on the other hand, it creates an artificial bubble of what this world looks like, right? So we always hear in these startup pitches great solutions for the world, and companies are bringing out the best of the best. But this is not how the actual world looks like, right? So we always speak about nice things here, but we don't speak about what is lacking, what is missing. So what do you think we have to do better that isn't said on stage?
You know, I was at Climate Week in New York City last week. I don't know how many Climate Weeks I've been to. But by the 5th day of Climate Week, I didn't have any more charm left. And I got up on stage to give a talk. And I started with, I don't want to come here next year. I don't want to come here next year and talk about the same old things. I don't want to come here next year and hear the same old performative pitches about a little pilot here or a little experiment there. I only want to come back if next year we're going to talk about everything we actually did between September 2024 and September 2025. And I feel that way, I really do. You know, I think there's so much that's missing. Like you heard these incredible entrepreneurs, many of them were on the stage with us today. There's no shortage of innovation. There's no shortage of fantastic plant-based products. We're 3D printing hamburgers in the hall today. There's no shortage of innovation and technology, but we are short of a couple of things. One of them is capital. I think we've seen a flight away from innovative food solutions toward other technologies.
Why do you think that has been? What has occurred?
You know, I think often these true change-making solutions just take a little longer to grow. And venture capital in particular, private equity has a little bit more, I don't know, I mean, they have very narrow parameters. Venture investors need a 10x return. They need to return the fund. They need to do it in a 7-year horizon. And so that kind of expectation around growth doesn't always align with some of the best solutions in the market. And so I think we need more capital allocators that can think about different kinds of capital instruments, maybe blended capital, a little bit of debt, a little bit of venture, a little bit of private equity, because the pace of innovation is there, but the funds, the cash, you need cash. You need cash, man. It's hard to do a lot in life without the cash that you need to get going. And if we don't have that cash flowing to innovation, that's going to be a barrier. I think also we need big food companies to stand up and be a part of the fight. It is great to continue to fund innovation within your own company, but how about doing more corporate venture capital? How about using the funds of your own company to invest in solutions that maybe are even a little competitive with yours, but could be adjacent, because a rising tide lifts all the boats. And I think those are the things that we need. So much comes down to giving these entrepreneurs the resources that they need to grow and scale. There's no lack of imagination. There's no lack of innovation. I think there's simply a lack of capital.
We were being a bit critical yesterday with how shy the efforts are in terms of doing industrial pilots and keeping it small. We need a big leap at this point. So we still have some minutes, but using the chance here today at this event, you are a very, very busy woman with a family, so you made the effort to come here. And that must be because you see the value. You see what can be done by coming and adding value to these events. So I was wondering why. What makes you go to so many forums like this one?
It's an honor to me to be here. You know, to have the chance to get out of my little Silicon Valley bubble and to come. First of all, I love Mexico, and I absolutely love Mexico City, and it's a joy to be here. But this is the place where food is happening. You know, when you walk through the halls and you get to peek at a booth or meet somebody or just understand what people are working on, for me, those kinds of connections, having dinner last night with Steve and Lisette, that's energy for me. It's always about community. And so the reason why I continue to come to spaces like this, one is because it helps me as a human. But there's a more practical reason too. I think that the Latin American market is uniquely positioned to be a real leader on sustainability. It is a mighty, mighty, mighty global force filled with amazing companies and leaders and change makers and agricultural supply chains that can be the catalyst for conversion. And I think often conversations around the transformation that are happening in the United States are missing that voice. And so I want to make sure that I am in the conversations, that I'm building the relationships, that I'm in the room and understanding what's happening not just in my own country, but here.
And how can we transform all the knowledge and the connections that come out of such events into something practical and actionable? Because we were also speaking yesterday about white papers and how they sometimes just stay in a drawer and they don't have real impact. What can we do better? For example, KM0, we have these really bright minds, we bring them together, and we have a lot of knowledge, but what can we do?
Well, if I can just brag a little bit about KM0 for a second. I mean, you have been so deeply committed to doing this work, to gathering people in person, to gathering people online through your social channels, to promoting the work of entrepreneurs and solution makers, and also, what was that beautiful little book that you gave me a couple of minutes ago?
Futuristic or reports.
Exactly. This is a report that's produced on a regular basis every year.
Every year, yeah.
Yeah, that really gives an industry an opportunity to see the best of what's happening around the world. And so I really do think, and not to make you blush, but I really think the work that you're doing at KM0 is an example of how leaders and organizations might make sure that we're really scaling our solutions. Organizations are just collections of humans. That's all we are. Whatever big company, LLC, whatever big company you're working at, you're a group of humans first and foremost. And humans are influenced and moved and motivated by other humans. And so I think what we really have to continue to do is what's happening in this room. It's get together, to talk to each other, to share stories of what's working, as I tried to do in my talk, but also to share stories of what's not, as I think we're doing right now. It's about gathering together, and it's about bringing people together.
Well, we're coming to an end, but I think it would be super useful for the people who have sticked to this conversation up to this point, to leave them with a call to action to all these Mexican and Latin American entrepreneurs, companies, leaders, investors, institutions. What can they do to have a real impact in the world? How can they, from their different positions, influence and make a better living, make a better world for all of us through food or through whatever they are doing?
Yeah, if you could do just one thing tonight, when you go home, find a quiet space, take out a piece of paper, not your phone, a literal piece of paper, and figure out where you are within the food system and where you have influence. If you are a brand, you have influence over your buying decisions. If you're a nonprofit, you have influence over your policy, or your policy that you're implementing in the real world. If you're an investor, you have influence over who you're investing in. And literally sit down and figure out where you fit within this conversation, where you have influence, and what's one way, just one way, that you might make a more sustainable choice. It might be an ingredient that you buy. It might be an entrepreneur that you highlight. It might be a collaborator. Or maybe you're just going to the grocery store tomorrow and you can choose some more bio or plant-based options. But sit down and figure it out for yourself, because I really think every single one of us has the right to be a part of the solution to climate change. And sometimes it starts with something as simple as making a better decision around your work or your food.
We have a super big power, and we have to use our power for the good. Thank you so much, Julia. I can't believe my love for being here with you. You are so inspiring.
Thank you.
A big applause for her.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks
Julia.
for sticking around.
Thank you very much for both. And Julia, thanks for choosing Mexico to be here. I'm so badly bad because I missed the mole yesterday. But thank you for sharing Mexico, for your knowledge, for your peaceful voice,
Oh, thank
and to
you.
be here with us. And
Thank
we
you
give
so
you
much.
these presents
Oh, wow.
to remember this day.
Oh,
I can put it here. Please come. Vengan, chicas, adelante. Y también para ti, Beatriz, and for you too, Beatriz. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Thank you.
And if you want to come here
Gracias.
in the middle, in the stage, to this picture for both strong women, that we close the first date with you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Ahí está esta fotografía oficial, listas, puestas. Sin duda, un agasajo poder escuchar el día de hoy en nuestro escenario este fire pitch. Thank you very much for both.
Gracias.
¿De qué? Al contrario, buen regreso.